like when you go into a grocery store. When you go into a grocery store, how many people go into a grocery store and make sure that they buy one of everything on the shelf? Nobody really? Why not? Because it's not all for you. You have to, as you listen to a sermon, learn to listen with a grocery store mentality. Because to do that, you have to realize, you know what, I'm here because I got to take something from here. And so you'll listen more intently to find out what it is that's yours. And sometimes it's more than one item, so you have to listen all the way to the end. But you also have the opportunity that way to say, you know, there were some things this morning that were okay, but those weren't for me. Here's what was for me. Here's what God wants to work with me on this morning, or to confirm in my life, or those kinds of things. As I prepared for this morning, it's interesting, I all but questioned God. Really, God, you sure? That's really not fitting with where we, because we're going to pray together for the nation at the end of this. And really, God, are you sure? And this morning, just in talking with Donna, then she began to share things that I went, wow, really? God. And we find those moments often in our life. We find other kinds of moments in our life that cause questions that sometimes aren't easily answered. The day following the Sandy Hill Elementary School tragedy, a woman I had known for a short time because of where I was working, who was a Christian, a relatively new Christian, but a Christian, came into the office where I worked, and she stuck her head in, and she just asked the question. She said, "No, Vic, where was our God yesterday?" And the way she said it, it wasn't bitter, wasn't ugly, wasn't challenging God's authority. It was her question was a little more like bewilderment. It was a little more like honestly searching. Where was our God? How could our God allow that kind of mindless killing of all those children? You know, as a pastor, I've heard that question, or one very like it, phrased much like that many times. But over the next several hours or days, I really stopped and pondered the answer to that question. And the questions that came out of seeking the answers to that question. Where's God when difficult things happen? Often we phrase that, or often I've heard it phrased as, how could a loving God? And then we go on. A few weeks ago, Ellie and I were fortunate enough, some of you will remember, to have some long, dear friends here. And back in this area, back in the back row, sat some good friends of mine that Ellie really, I don't think, had ever met before, even from the Springfield, Missouri area. And my, what a surprise, I hadn't seen them in probably 35 years. Just a baby. Not. I wish that were still true. And then sitting right up here, coming in fashionably late, as has always been her style, came Craig and Roxanne, or as we just affectionately call her, Rox, and spent that morning with us. I told some of you that I would share their story today, or sometime, and today I want to share some of that story. Craig was from, like myself, his high school years were spent in Neodesha, and he had gone on a pole vaulting scholarship to Pittsburgh and was attending school there at the time that I became a Christian. For some unknown reason, God plagued Craig with some responsibility in mentoring me as a new Christian, about a sophomore in high school, and kind of a goofy kid, I imagine. And through that process in 1972, Craig met with my parents, my mother and his mother were more sisters than friends for a great number of years. And through that relationship, Craig felt really, I'll say, coerced by God to invite me to go with him. He was going to an event called Explo 72. It was a campus crusade event. Dr. Bill Bright was still alive and overseeing that event. It ended up there were some 100,000 plus, mostly college and high school age Christians that converged upon the area of Dallas-Fort Worth. And Craig invited me to go with him. And my mom and dad, we talked to them first. They thought that was a great idea. I went and we took off. And the old Plymouth Valiant, for those of you who remember carburetors, you had the carburetor linkage glued together with epoxy. And my folks still let me go. We didn't know where we were going to stay when we got there. He had a tent in the trunk of his Plymouth Valiant, and we ended up in Arlington. And some guy's pasture. There's no pastors left there, I don't think anymore. But there was a pastor there at the time. There were over 10,000 people in this little pasture, all in tents. Most of them were Jesus freaks, and I was like, dude, this is crazy. I never knew this kind of world was out there. Our tents were also close. We were the shared tent bays. And Craig and I were just there for with the tent next to us. And we were just there for the ride to see what God would do next in our lives. It was amazing. I could share stories all day long about just those few days that we were there. But one particular day, it was so hot in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And, we kind of wanted to go into this Baptist Bible bookstore, which were popular in the Dallas area back then. But we really wanted to get the air conditioning. And so we went into the Baptist Bible bookstore. And me being the introvert that I am, I started talking with people in that place. And I started talking to this gal who was vivacious and kind of a Jesus freak girl from Cleveland, Ohio. And we stood and we talked and we talked and we talked. And through this, I found out that she had pretty much, for lack of better terms, hitched a ride to get to Dallas and didn't have a way. We had meetings, big meetings every night in the Cotton Bowl. We filled up the Cotton Bowl with the floor and surrounding and all of it to capacity with folks, mostly high school and college, just there to worship God and just there to come together at this day. So